This is Wild About Liberty, where the community joins together. Now here's your host, Terry Wild.
Wild About Liberty. We are Wild About Liberty, and we have a good guest on the show today. You're going to enjoy Lawrence Hebron. And Lawrence has been a regular contributor on the show, and we're really grateful for his contribution. Welcome to the show, Lawrence.
Oh, thank you. Glad to be here again.
Well, we had a really good discussion on our last show together, and I think we made some really good points that I'd like to maybe follow up on this show. But, you know, we're in a booth right now. This is the KXEX radio broadcast booth, and they've made our building, Liberty Coalition and Clovis Business Center, their home. So we are now the home of KXEX Radio. I'm sitting in the booth enjoying Jeremy, our technician, and I'm grateful to the Marino family, Lisa and Guillermo. And we have an opportunity to get our voices heard. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching us on YouTube, on Rumble, on a whole bunch of platforms. And so we're not just going over by radio, but you can watch us live on Facebook and all these other platforms. This booth that I'm in has a glass enclosure, and I think it's a good time to talk about the company that put this glass in for us, and that's Sierra Glass in Clovis, California. And we want you to call them if you need any glass work done for your business, for your residence. It's Sierra Glass. They're located at 1527 Railroad Avenue in Clovis, California. Give them a call. Their phone number is 559-304-9839. Clovis Glass. We appreciate what they did in helping make this booth such a pleasant place to work in. So, the conversation that we were having in the last program, in my mind, is critical to define why America is a great country. When people trash it and find fault and accuse us, meaning conservatives, and call it Bible-believing Christians, they're trying to justify their actions in wanting to destroy the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, our way of life, which really happened by seeking religious freedom and making God central to everything that we do. So when we talk about that, Lawrence, how do you see the situation we're in now compared to how much ground we've already lost?
Well, we've lost a great deal because we are moving away from those core principles that made us great in the first place. And it is absolutely imperative to understand that the Bible must be included in that. Even those of us who appreciate the Constitution, that's not enough. I remember about 10, 12 years ago or longer when the Tea Party movement was started. The Tea Partiers were very big on lowering taxes and on limiting government and on protecting individual liberties. And I got a chance to talk to a number of these groups back in that time. And I would take in a prop, and it was a two-legged stool. And I said, can a two-legged stool stand up? And I'd set it on the ground and let it go, and of course it'd topple over. I said, there's another leg that's essential for that stool to be able to stand up. And that's true with our country too. You can't just talk about limiting government. You can't just talk about protecting rights and expect it all to work. There's a moral element that has to be included. Otherwise, the whole thing will topple. See, and the point was made in the previous program, and I'll make it again, that you cannot give liberty to an immoral people. Well, you can, but it won't work. If you give liberty to an immoral people, they'll do immoral stuff. And the whole society will collapse. And the whole reason for creating a society and a government will be undermined. You know, it's to give a framework where people can work together to enhance their lives, to protect their life and enhance their lives. But without moral behavior, if you give a lot of freedom to an immoral people, they do immoral stuff.
But yeah, that point is critical, because in their version of having freedom, the right to do what they want to do, they have to stop our rights from being expressed. So they want freedom. They're calling it freedom of, my body, my choice, and abortion, the freedom to be who they really are if a man wants to be a woman. And in a sense, they do have that freedom as long as it doesn't infringe on my rights and the threatening my family, my children. So that's the dynamic, isn't it? We've been given inalienable rights. We are a free country, but then you have this dynamic, all right, your freedom can infringe on my freedom. How does that work?
Right. There's an old saying that the freedom of my fist ends at the tip of your nose. I'm free to swing my fist around as long as I'm not hurting someone else.
I've had a couple of times when that freedom didn't stop in time.
Didn't stop. Somebody was lost control there. Yeah. But that's the whole point that they oftentimes forget about. Once your liberty starts to impact another, especially in a negative way, then it becomes regulatable. And that's where government can step in, rightfully so, and say, okay, you need to control here a little bit. You need to pull back that fist. You're not entitled to bloody this other guy's nose without justification. And like you said, the other side, they want total freedom to do whatever they darn well please, regardless of the consequences on someone else. And you mentioned abortion already. Didn't take long for that topic to come up, but it's such an important one, and it illustrates so much about the difference between our side and their side. We respect life. They don't. We realize that that baby in the womb is a life, is alive, and whatever we do to it has consequences for it that are felt. So abortion does not take into account the interest of that baby. Some other people just make it a decision, and it's a life and death decision. That baby had nothing to do with it. And it's so strange that Roe v. Wade passed, 50 years ago, was based on the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment has the due process clause in it, which says you cannot deprive someone of their rights without due process. But we have about 63 million dead babies who never had an attorney to represent them. We never took their interest into account. And that's something that Christians do pretty well, especially if they're living up to their faith and their creed. But others do not. We take into account the fact that swinging my fist around has consequences for somebody else.
Well, you mentioned,
I need to check that.
Right. You mentioned something that put a thought in my head, and actually I've never even heard it discussed before. But when that baby's in the womb, at what point does it have a soul? What point does it have a spirit? I've never heard that discussion. Have you?
I've heard it kind of sideswiped a little bit. There's been
life begins,
but yeah.
But there is a soul. There is a spirit, and that has to be taken into consideration when you're talking about destroying a life. You're destroying this baby in the womb, and whether or not it has a spirit or a soul, our belief is that it does.
I suspect, now I can't say for certain, but this is my view in it. I suspect that the spirit precedes the body. I remember seeing in St. Augustine a number of years ago, St. Augustine, Florida, and going around the old town there, and it was in a bookstore, and I saw basically a bumper sticker that said, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience."
Whoa.
And when you look at it that way, then it's easy to make the case that the spirit precedes the body, so that from the moment of conception, the spirit's already there. And when you do damage to the body, you also do damage to the spirit. And actually, this is kind of one of the topics in one of the books I mentioned. We talked a little bit last time called In the Beginning. That's basically a conversation between God and the baby in the womb, and it starts moments after conception. Now, is that based on fact or science? No, it was based on, to develop the story of what would God tell his new little baby, if he has the chance to do that for
Very interesting.
So, but the whole idea here is that, yes, from the beginning, this is a life and alive. And actually, we confirm that in our own founding document, the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence has a brilliant and simple philosophy of government that almost everybody misses, which is strange because it's hiding in plain sight. It's found in the second paragraph of the Declaration. And much of that philosophy is included in the most memorized portion of the Declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And unfortunately, most people end their memory work there. If they just went 10 words further, they would see this is not just a collection of political platitudes. This is a profound philosophy of government. Those next 10 words say that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. That's the American philosophy, and it's very different from any other philosophy of government. And it becomes crystal clear when you read those passages backwards. When you do, it says this: governments are instituted among men to secure these rights that are endowed by their Creator. So the rightful role of government is to do the work of God. The political work of God is to secure these rights, the Holy Trinity of which are life, property, and liberty. And when does that all begin? In the beginning. Because it says here, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
Very good.
When right kick in, it's not, you don't have to be so old. You don't have to take a class, pass a test, have a certificate. You don't have to be this tall to ride this ride. It says right there, you are created equal. So from the moment of your creation, which is conception, every being, every human being is on the same legal status as everyone else. So that just conceived baby has the same legal rights as a 1-year-old, a 21-year-old, a 101-year-old.
Well, that's a great concept, because I'm writing a book called The Rights of God. And I began the book a number of years ago. I've been doing research, and it has opened up an understanding that I've never had before. I've been a Christian now for going on 50 years. I accepted Christ in 1969 and immediately went into a Christian commune in Haight-Ashbury. And it was that whole Jesus movement period. We traveled the country and had evangelistic meetings, and it was amazing. Some people have asked me if I've seen that new movie about that period. I said, no, I didn't have to see it. I lived it. And that's what happened. But in all these years, I've come to an understanding and appreciation about God's rights and how God perceives things, how God looks at things. And to also realize that God has feelings. We were made in his image. We're made in his likeness. What does that mean? And we know a lot about what Christ is, but Jesus said in the 6th chapter of the Gospel of John, you'll die in your sins unless you believe I am who I claim to be. And so looking at all that from God's perspective really helps. And it adds that dimension that we're not just walking this earth on our own, by ourselves. God's presence is here. God's looking at things every minute of every day, and he's responding. He's reacting. He isn't threatened. He isn't uptight. He isn't worried. He's in charge. And so we have to, live our life in that perspective, that we're here in this country that started out as a way to find religious freedom. And we put together this document called the Constitution that is unparalleled. because God's at the center of it. And so what is that? How do you see that? How do you feel about, looking more at it from God's perspective?
I think it's essential. It's critical. I don't know. And for all of us out there, maybe you don't know if your parents intended you or not. Maybe you were an accident to them, but you were not an accident to God. He knew you were coming. He was thrilled about it. You're here on purpose. Well, everything that's made on purpose is made for a purpose. So one of the things each one of us has to consider here is, what is God's purpose for my life? He defines that. He sent me here to do something. I know my dad was a masonry contractor. When people hired him, they hired him to build this. It might be a wall, might be a bank, but that was the purpose. And God sent us here for a purpose. And if you don't figure out what that is, you're never really going to feel like your life has that much meaning. So we have to consider that. And that's true with nations as well. A nation is simply a group, a gathering of God's children. So he wants those nations to do what he intended them to do as much as he wants those individuals to do what he wanted us to do. So you can't remove God from the formula without messing up everything. It's just that simple.
Well, that we might as well go down this road, because first of all, I like it, but we're in the Christmas season, and in a couple of weeks, we're going to be celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ. And the significance of his coming to this world really has its roots in the beginning. Well, in the Bible, there's two beginnings. The first one is in Genesis, that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But there's another beginning before that, and that's in the book of John. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. All things were made by him. And that beginning takes us before creation, at a point that we don't know very much at all about what that, comprises. But we know certain statements, and we know certain indications of God being self-sufficient before he created this world. And we try and look at that in terms of time. Well, time was created the first week of creation. When God said in the beginning, time, that's when time started. And time is just a temporary situation. It's going to stop being, it won't exist once Christ comes back and reorders the earth. But Jesus Christ was before all things. And we have to understand that his right and his ability is to rule this creation. He's the rightful creator. And so when we talk about America and France and Italy and Germany and all these other countries, they're just temporary occupants of a planet that God created for his purpose. But here's a very significant thing that I'd like to get your take on. He always knew that he was going to create humankind. It was always in his plan to create a human being in his image, in his likeness, after his own kind. And that doesn't mean we're divine. We're not. We're created. But we partake in the divine nature. And the significance about humanity is, excuse me, God created humankind to accommodate him becoming one. He always knew he was going to be a human being. So when he designed us and gave us our function and our ability and our features and faculties, all of those were put in there knowing that he was going to become a human being. And what I don't hear a lot of people talk about is he's a human being this very minute. Jesus Christ is fully God and fully human being. So Jesus Christ is a human being right now, functioning in a celestial body. Probably we shouldn't be going down that road, but But that's kind of significant because we also have to know who Jesus Christ says we are. And that takes into this whole scope of he made this creation to be a phenomenal creature. We are humankind, human beings were made in God's image and likeness and have a future and an eternity in this creation. Now that's a long way to go to get an answer, but I'll let you comment on it.
Right where you said there at the end, one of the things that always amazes me about God is that he not only allows us to be a part of his creation, he allows us to be a part of its creation. He lets us work as his agents to do things. And you talked about in the beginning and basically a time before time. These are all things we cannot really comprehend or have adequate expressions, but there was a time before time. There was a time before the creation. And God's there existing with the heavenly host and with the three persons of God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And it seems like there's something that an important thing that happened in that time before the spark of creation was a covenant. That even before God created all of this physical existence, there was a spiritual covenant that he made with us even before we existed. Well, you can argue that if you exist in the mind of God, you exist, period. You know, if he's imagining what he's going to do in the future, again, he's outside of time. But that's an important thing here too. God always intended to have a relationship with us, and he always intended to have a partnership with us. And we need to be good partners. And we broke that covenant relationship early on. You know, as soon as we started sinning, as soon as we started to disobey, boom, we broke the agreement, we broke the contract. And pretty much everything since then has been God's effort to reestablish that covenant and to reestablish the partnership. Jesus defined our relationship with God the Father in the first two words of the Lord's Prayer, our Father. He didn't say
Exactly.
my Father, he said our Father.
Yes.
We are family and we're his kids. And just like any good parents, they have ambitions for their children. Well, God's ambitions are a whole lot bigger than, you know, for you to become a doctor, a lawyer, a famous artist, whatever, just have a happy, productive life. God's ambitions for us are eternal in terms of time and scope and space. So he's got some really good plans, but we've messed them up.
But you know, right there is the key to understanding our purpose. When God created us, it was for relationship. And he made us capable of developing what I call a spiritual intelligence. You know, human intelligence, when you're a little baby, you're in a crib, and eventually over time you find out you want a baba, you want the milk comes from a cow, the cow eats grass. So you develop the ability to identify objects, to understand them, what they're used for, and you grow into human intelligence. And that's the process. And then you get to the point where you're self-sufficient and you should be able to manage yourself. Well, that's what happens spiritually. We're born into this world now as a baby, and we have to begin to grow and develop. And that process is important to God because when he created us, he wanted satisfaction from this relationship. He wanted to be able to relate to us and love us, and in a way that we were capable of appreciating it and returning that love at a level he could appreciate. Well, you could appreciate a 4-year-old child and enjoy that, but if it's a 44-year-old child still acting like a 4-year-old, something's wrong. And in our relationship here on this earth, God wants us to grow in spiritual intelligence and knowledge and understanding. That's the whole book of John. The Gospel of John is the revelation that Jesus came to reveal himself. and to help us understand who we are. Because if we aren't who he wants us to be, he isn't getting the full satisfaction that he created us for. What do you think?
Well, Jesus is our role model. He came here to show us how it should be done and also how it can be done. Again, being fully human, he came in here in a way that we could relate to. In fact, there's a pretty a kind of dear story. If I could just, since it's at Christmas time, just take a couple minutes here to share.
Please.
Again, it has to do with how the lengths to which God has gone in order to relate to us. So it's about a farmer. He lives far up north, maybe Wisconsin, Minnesota, something like that. And he just lost his wife earlier in that year. His kids are coming. It's almost Christmas time. His kids are coming to visit with him. So he's looking forward to that. He's done his last chores for the day, and a big storm is coming in. He knows it's coming in. So he comes in, takes off his jacket. He makes himself a cup of coffee, and he's standing there in the kitchen looking out the window. And he notices this bird fly in and land on a bare tree out in the yard there. And he says, oh no, this storm is coming in. This is not good for this bird, And then a whole flock of birds came in following this one bird, and they're all filling up this tree and everything. He says, oh no, he says, this storm they're going to die. It's going to be too harsh for them. So he put his coat back on, put his boots back on, went out there. He opened the barn door. He says, if I can get them in the barn, they'll be warm enough they can survive this storm. So he opened the barn door. Then he went around on the opposite side of the tree from the barn, and he started making all these noises and everything else. And it did frighten the birds off. They went taking off, but they didn't go in the barn. They went someplace else. And he felt so badly for these birds. I mean, he'd had a big loss in his life, and he had an appreciation for all life. And then he went back in and he started thinking about it. He says, if I could have been a bird, I could have talked to them in their own language. I could explain to them the danger that they're facing, and I could have led them to safety. And then he realized why Jesus became human.
Exactly.
Jesus became human so he could relate to us. He could tell us about the danger that we were in, this grave mortal danger, not only physically, but spiritually. And it wouldn't seem so big and scary, like a human trying to talk to this bird and they all get scared. He'd come here as one of us and tell us what we needed to do so we could be saved, basically go in God's barn and avoid the storm. So that's a big part of this whole thing. Jesus came here as one of us, in part to repair this covenant that had been broken. Since humans broke the covenant with God, there's a whole history to covenants that dates way back to ancient times, even before the Jews. But one of the things is, if a covenant is broken, one of the partners of the covenant is the only one who can repair it and restore it. So we humans broke that covenant that God had created even before the creation. So only a human could fix it. But only God had the ability to do that, so he became a human, and then warned us, and we need to take advantage of the warning and get in the barn.
Yeah, exactly. And that really is the significance of Christmas. I mean, we are lost, and he's the good shepherd, and he's going to lead us, if we allow him to, into the barn. And so I appreciate that story. Well, people are looking for answers. Again, every year, Christmas time, people begin to change, and they begin to think of family and maybe some of the past Christmases, and it, I think, changes attitudes, and people become a little bit more friendly. But then they have to face January, and then it becomes back to the old grind again. But it doesn't have to be that way. Jesus Christ, when I accepted Christ into my life, I didn't want anything to do with Christianity. I didn't want anything to do with Jesus Christ. My brother was nonstop. He was unstoppable. You couldn't get him to stop talking about Jesus and telling me that I needed to be saved. And I did everything I could to get away from him. But one day I went to church and I heard a sermon and I thought, well, I'm going to go try this. So I went up front. I listened to what they said and I responded, and I'm waiting. Well, after church, I left and I went to this card room, had a beer, and I was playing cards. My brother came in and said, Terry, what happened? You just gave your life to Jesus Christ. I said, oh, yeah. I tried that, but it didn't work. Nothing happened. And so not long after that, it did work. Something rose up inside of me. This feeling and this sense of God's presence came over me, and it took me to a place of repentance and confession. And once I had that experience, I thought, oh my God, I don't ever want to be the person I was again. I want this life of knowing Jesus Christ and serving Jesus Christ. And so that put me on the path, but I had a brother who wouldn't give up. And so our job is to let that message be known. Jesus Christ is the child that's been given to us, and a son has been given, and the government is upon his shoulders, and he's the rightful authority over all creation. But if we accept that invitation, and if we experience that transformation of our lives, why would you ever want to give that up? How did you become a Christian?
Well, my parents were Christian. I would not describe them as Bible thumpers, but they were Christian. It was kind of a quiet part of, it was a quiet Christianity, but they put me in a Christian school. I went to Valley Christian School in San Bernardino for kindergarten through fourth grade. So I heard all the Bible stories, the Sunday school level stories. We would always open with a song. My favorite was always Onward Christian Soldiers. So we do all that. So I heard all of that, but I was always a very inquisitive person. I always wanted to know the truth. I'd have to say that before my commitment to God, and this is going to sound a little strange, but before my commitment to God was my commitment to truth. So I wanted to know the truth, whatever it was. And I'm talking about, I'm like 7, 8 years old. So I would explore, well, is there a God? My parents, my teachers tell me there's a God. Is there? I don't see him. I don't sense him with any of my physical senses. And I always came to the conclusion that there is a God because there's stuff. Who made the stuff? Like I said, my dad was a builder. And I used to love to go out on the job with him. And you go out on day one, here's this empty field. And then you come back a couple months later and here's a bank. How did that happen? Well, somebody made it. Well, doesn't that apply to this universe? Doesn't it apply to our planet?
Exactly.
The sun, the solar system? Isn't that here because somebody made it? So I always believed that there was a God, but I wasn't sure about his nature. So progressing now, you said about how did this happen? There's a little bit of, you might regret having asked that, but a little bit later on, again, in my inquisitive nature, I started to read through the Bible, and I found there were discrepancies. And I don't mean science says this and the Bible says that. I mean, in one place, the Bible says one thing, and another place it says something else, and they don't agree. And I thought, well, my God is perfect. This book, therefore, must not be his book because it's not perfect. So I rejected it. Probably for around 15 years or so. It was not an act of rebellion. It was an act of faithfulness because I felt, I looked at the Bible kind of like a mathematician looks at a mathematic formula. He comes up with this formula and it gives him the correct answer 1,000,000 times, but on the next time it fails, it gives him the wrong answer. He throws the whole thing out because he can't trust it.
Sure. Not reliable.
So, that's kind of how I handle the Bible, but I always wanted to know the truth. So even through this 15 or so year period, I kept praying, I want to know the truth. Please tell me the truth. And I can't say that I had any angelic visitations or handwriting on the wall or anything like that, but gradually over time, I just felt myself coming to this truth. And one of the things I realized was that even though facts and truth are similar and related, they're not the same. And that truth is far more important than facts, just like understanding is far more important than knowledge. And even
Right.
though I found places where the Bible wasn't factually accurate because it had disagreed with itself, I never found a place where it failed to tell the truth. And I was a pretty critical observer. I mean, I used to say, oh, it's not the Holy Bible, it's the Hooey Bible. Or the Holy Bible, all right, it's full of holes. I described it as a collection of Jewish fairy tales. So I was pretty critical. But I started to realize slowly that I've never found a place where it does not tell the truth. And I can't say that about anything else. That's pretty remarkable. And so with that, I kind of just kept getting pulled in, farther and farther into this, and so glad that I have. You were talking about, this process, and it seems to me that accepting God and finding your purpose is an act of faith. It's almost like there's a river, and you come to the river, and you've got a choice. You either jump in, or you go back the other way you came. And my view is, when you come to God's river, you just need to jump in. You don't know where it's going. You
Right.
don't know around the bend. You don't know if there's a waterfall or calm waters or rapids or whatever. But if it's God's river, it will take you to a good place. And our job is not to know where that place is. Our job is to just accept that God knows where it is. And our job is to jump in the river and say, I trust you, Father. Here I go, whoosh, and then see what happens. And it's a remarkable journey.
And we really bear the responsibility of telling people our testimony and to preach the gospel. And that gospel isn't just a one-time salvation message. The gospel is a lifetime and an eternity of having a relationship with God and being this creation that he made us into, with all of its beauty and facets and complexities, and being able to know that this future is going to go on for eternity. When you die, that's the end of things, in the sense of having an opportunity. You have to make that decision. And when several years after I accepted Christ, I remembered this lady. Her name was Mrs. McKinsey, and my mother had died when I was 8, so I was 9 and 10 years old. I understood that she had cookies and milk, but you had to go to this little Bible study, and they had a flannel graph story, and so she would give us the cookies and milk, but we had to watch the flannel graph story. And so I always appreciated that. And then I just decided I didn't want anything to do with it, and I left. I never went back. But once I accepted Christ, I remembered her. And I thought, I'm going to try and get a hold of her. And I did. It was very difficult because by this time, she had moved and there was all kinds of things going on. But I reached her in New York City, and I said, Miss McKinsey, I really felt a strong urge to call you and thank you. I've accepted Jesus Christ. Now, this is years later. I was like 9 years old, and I got saved when I was 23. And she said, Terry, I've been praying for you ever since. So there's an example. I was wild and crazy. I lived a life of real moral disobedience. And yet that woman prayed all those years, and then finally I accepted Christ. So, I urge people, if you're having problems, start asking people to pray for you, because prayer is the one thing that we can hold on to, that God uses to help bring us to that point of making a decision and accepting Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I think prayer is very important, but a lot of people say, well, I pray and pray and pray, and it doesn't happen. Oh, are we still there? Do you still have me?
Yep.
Okay, because my screen just went.
Oh
Uh,
no.
okay, well, I'll just keep talking. You kind of give me some clues here.
Okay.
Um, so I think one of the things people say, well, prayer doesn't work. I tried this, it doesn't happen. Well, how do you know? Again, we have an infinite God who's working through infinity, and your last breath is not his last chance to make a difference in your life. So how do you know that the prayer was never answered? He may have decided, you know what, you've asked for this, but I can do better. And you want it now, but a different time will be even better. So you have to trust that God is going to do it at the best time and in the best way. And I think another thing, though, to increase the likelihood of your prayers being effective is once you say the prayer, become the prayer to the extent that it's possible. Don't just say the words and then say, okay, clap your hands together and say that did it. I'm done. Become the prayer. So if you have an elderly friend who's poor and has health issues and can't get around to do their shopping or whatever, or the money to do it, you can do it. Go out, go to the store, get their grocery list and do that for them. That's blessing them. You can be the blessing for the prayer. So I think in addition to making the decision for Christ, then it's on you, it's an obligation on you to live that decision. And not
Exactly.
just, go out and live the decision. When Jesus was getting ready to ascend, he gave his disciples, I call it an operation order, because when I look at the Great Commission, I see paragraphs 2 and 3 of the operation order all NATO nations use. Paragraph 2 is mission. What Jesus said, go and make disciples of all the nations. And then paragraph 3 is execution. How do you accomplish the mission? He said, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. Notice Jesus didn't say, go and make believers.
Right,
He said,
right.
disciples. And that's a higher level of performance. He just doesn't want a bunch of spiritual couch potatoes sitting out there and say, yep, I believe in Jesus. I got my fire insurance.
Exactly.
He's out there doing the work, just like he did.
And then you're fulfilled. That's the whole point. In God's economy, everybody wins. And
Yep.
and so by looking at the job that we have in front of us in this country, trying to bring America back to its founding covenant that we've made with each other and with God and with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence, those are profound. Those were profound. Call it commitments that people made. I mean, look at those founding fathers. They lost a lot. People suffered during that period of time, and there was retribution even after we became a nation. There were people that suffered in England, and their families suffered because of their commitment to this new country, but they did it, and they made that sacrifice. Well, we've got to do the same thing. It's our time now to step up, and you're stepping up, and I really appreciate so much that you're telling us and helping us understand, because you said knowledge and understanding is critical, and it would solve a lot of our problems that we're having in this whole debate with the woke left, telling us what they think is reality. So we got about a minute and a half. Why don't you take a few more minutes and just to give us your parting thoughts, and then we'll wrap this up and wait for the next time we can do this on the radio.
Well, as you're talking about doing it and making decisions and talking about our heritage as a nation and the amazing people who put this country together, reminds me of the end of the first verse of the Star-Spangled Banner, and there's 4 verses. The end of it asks a very important question. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Does it? Will it?
Exactly.
Many generations of Americans have faced that same question, and they've all had the same answer. Yes, it will. I will do what I need to. But now it's our turn. We face that same question. Will the Star-Spangled Banner still wave, or the land of the free and the home of the brave? If it's going to for our kids and their kids and their kids, it'll be because we made it happen. We've got to make that decision.
Well, thank you so much, Lawrence. We are all in this together. We appreciate our listeners and those watching us on Facebook and Rumble and YouTube. Appreciate you being on this program. Until then, God bless you all. This is Terry Wild with Wild About Liberty.
Thank you for listening to Wild About Liberty with Terry Wild, only on KXCX 1550.